Hello world, hello internet, and welcome to the 7th episode of the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. I am Valentin, your host. My host name is Frikla Handwerk, and this show, which is about people and stories from the Nix ecosystem, we will start again with a conflict of interest disclosure. The show is made possible by public money from the European Commission through the NGI program Next Generation Internet, and my role here is as an independent contractor to the NixOS Foundation. But I also happen to work for a company called Tweag, which is heavily invested in the Nix ecosystem, which means that there are a lot of Tweagers around doing interesting things. And if I invite some of them to this show, this presents an obvious potential for conflict of interest. And I'm aware of this, and we should be open about it. So here, my goal is to get people on the show who have interesting stories and opinions and thoughts to share. And I hope they're also relevant for the community and the general audience. And opinions here are my own, so nobody told me how to choose my guests under time constraints, to be honest. So what I want to say is that we're very much aware. If you have questions about this or want to discuss this, you can reach me on GitHub or Matrix or the NixOS Discourse. And with that out of the way, I would like to remind you to send us your questions today. In the last episodes, you were a great audience, and I would like to continue this. You will be able to send comments on any of the channels you are watching this on. We also have a Matrix room dedicated for this. And if you want to be part of the show and ask your questions in person, you can find the link to the studio in the calendar event for today's episode. And now let's welcome our guests today, Théophane Hufschmitt and Matthias Meschede. Welcome. Hi.
Hey, Valentin.
Hey, Valentin.
So yeah, we will talk about conflict of interest more. Definitely, you're both colleagues of mine at Tweag. So there's like companies operating in open source where lots of volunteers are also present is definitely an issue that we have to address and we want to talk about. But the main topic today is companies using Nix, commercial use of Nix. And before we get into details, let me introduce you a little bit to the audience. Théophane, you're one of the Nix maintainers. You kicked off the process to found a maintainer team. And in the community, you're probably most well known for adding content address derivations to Nix. And before that, you were working on adding a gradual typing system to the gradual type system to the Nix language. Matthias, you're a sales executive at Tweag. And in the Nix community, you are actually the person who invented, or one of the people who came up with Summer of Nix. And I would like to talk about that as well a little bit, how that came into being and how we got here where we are, because I'm also now helping organizing Summer of Nix. And this will be definitely interesting for our audiences, especially participants of Summer of Nix. So you now have to answer my first and obvious question that I asked to everyone on the show. Who or what got you into Nix? And in your case, apart from it being your job, why are you still here? What makes you stick around? Théophane, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So, I got into Nix because I was in university, and like all university students, I had nothing better to do than try out new, fun, probably useless, but exciting tools. And a friend of mine showed me this weird Nix tool that looks like it was straight out of some researcher's nonsense and probably impractical, but looked fun. So we stared at that for some time, and a few days later I installed it on an old spare machine that I had. Well, that machine probably still has Nix on its hard drive, although I don't know where it went. But that was my first installation of NixOS, and that's probably the only OS I've ever installed since. Because it turned out that this funky theoretical thing was actually usable in practice, and not just usable, but damn good. And beyond NixOS, I realized that Nix was great for development. That was a joke or a game of us also at university, where we had all these courses which required installing custom softwares, and the teachers were kind of struggling to get all the students to install that, and we would just write our Nix shells for that. And it's the same thing now, except that rather than weird teaching-related software, we just install weird development-related softwares. But the game is still the same, and it's still as fun.
And how did you get to make this your full-time job? Because now you're also the team lead of the Nix Group, the Nix technical group at Tweag, where you essentially do Nix not just alone full-time, but with a whole bunch of people.
So in a way, that just happened. So when I started, actually the very first time Nix was my full-time job was right at the end of my studies when I had to do an internship. And I really wanted to do something around Nix because that was cool. But it was a bit hard because, since we're here to talk about industrial Nix usages, at that time, industrial Nix usages was non-zero, but practically non-existent or non-visible. And the only companies who were investing in Nix were essentially one-person consultancies. And getting to actually be like paid for an internship to do some researchy things around Nix, so probably not practically applicable, was hard. And there's all kind of stories about that, but eventually I ended up taking that internship at Tweag and like being paid to work on adding a type system to Nix, which that by itself didn't end up anywhere, but at least Tweag picked up all the mistakes I made during that time and used that as things to not do when they started working on Nickel, which is a Nix-inspired language. But so I ended up working for Tweag, and after that internship, I stopped working on Nix to do consulting for Tweag on various domains. Still a bit of Nix, but not as my main day job. But after some time again, Tweag started investing in Nix more and more, and I got the opportunity to start working on CA derivations full-time, which I did, and that one thing leading to another, I ended up just doing Nix full-time and becoming the lead of the Nix team and the Nix group at Tweag. And that's how it happened.
Okay, Matthias, what about you? What as a sales exec, you also have a technical background at Tweag, but what made you encounter Nix to begin with?
Yeah, you asked the question in the right order because actually Théophane got me into Nix, but I maybe have to say a little bit more about that because I actually stumbled into it a little bit by accident. I was actually an academic earthquake researcher, a seismologist, and I worked mostly in the open source world on different tools that I used in that world. There's, for example, a library called OpsPy in the Python world, which is pretty cool. If you can use that to detect nuclear bombs at home if you want. If one goes off on the other side of the world. I was looking for a job in the IT world, going out from academia for many reasons. And I met at a hiring event Matthias, the former CEO of Tweag, and I didn't actually know what I was getting into. I went through some interviews and so on, and then I went to the Tweag office. At the time, we were always a remote first company, but there was an office in Paris, not too far from the Eiffel Tower. There was a little room with people sitting in front of their screens, and to the left side, I went in there, said, "Hi, what's your name?" And there was Théophane. The person was sitting there, and I asked him, "What are you doing?" And Théophane said, "I'm doing Nix." And then I asked, "What is that about?" And I think you said something about configuration management or something like this, Théophane. But in any case, all hope was lost with me at that moment because I had literally no clue what I was getting into.
I probably gave the same answer I'm always getting when people are asking me what Nix is about, which is something around the lines of something doing everything, but I can't explain it properly.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's also a good point, because it took me really a long time. I mean, maybe others know that Tweag is quite into functional programming in general, and I had a pretty long learning curve to get through to really understand what Tweag was doing, but it was definitely intriguing. Especially because after talking to Théophane, you could have said, well, it's just, some employee at Tweag who's doing that. I actually went to the office of Mathieu, the CEO I already talked about before, and Mathieu was just installing Nix OS as the CEO, and so that's when I thought, okay, this is a company where this is a technology that I'm not going to get around at this company, and everyone is using it basically, and this was an extremely nice journey, I have to say, to learn about Nix, to understand its value proposition, especially because as an academic researcher before, I was lacking exactly tools like Nix, and I have seen day to day basically what problems you run into if you don't have anything like Nix available. So for me, the whole value of Nix and so on was pretty quickly clear. And so that's then at some point, I installed also Nix OS, and I got deeper and deeper into it over time. That's my story with it.
That was back in, I suppose, 2017, 2018, 5-6 years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When Théophane was working on his type system, and but what changed since then? So Nix being some academic obscure thing that is hard to explain from today. How many companies are using Nix today, and what type of companies are they?
Sorry, I was muted. So I learned about that also gradually over time. In the beginning, I had no clue, how many companies are actually using Nix and so on. I just thought relatively quickly that this is, something that should definitely have, people interested in it, because it's so powerful. And before, as an earthquake researcher especially, I was working on a lot of very cool stuff and things, but it was not directly applicable. So basically my first impression in the industry was, that it should be very easy to, to find jobs for in the Nix world. It should be very easy to find users and so on, because it's just so useful. And surprisingly, in the beginning, I wasn't so clear. Théophane already said that in the beginning it wasn't easy to find a company using Nix. And to me, the first time I actually learned about the number of or of the size of the ecosystem was when I got into Summer of Nix, and there we made an assessment. We wanted to kind of gather all companies because of a hiring event. Maybe I can speak later about that idea. And we found around 100 companies, and I think now we have definitely more, but I don't know exactly how many. And so there's definitely a sizable community now, I would say, on the company size. But what's more interesting than this number is that there are a few very big players who are using Nix, and there are also a few, very small companies. So it's a very diverse ecosystem, and something very healthy, I feel, in terms of diversity of the users. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that more. Théophane, let's get back to you. You ended up leading the Nix Group at Tweag after Elko, who was the team lead, who also worked at Tweag up to the last year. So you were also, that means that you were also one of the closest collaborators with the original author of Nix, Elko Dostra. What changed the dynamic of working on Nix, on the code base, when you were not in the same company anymore? Because before that, you were also working quite closely together. You had like regular meetings and everything. How did this change, and just how does this change?
So in a way, not too much changed because I mean, I was still talking to Elko after he left. I mean, it's not like we suddenly stopped talking. But one thing that changed, and that was a very good change, I think, is that that we were already having many conversations with Elko and or others at Tweag or outside about the fact that working at Tweag, working on Nix, you kind of have a blessed path if you happen to be close to Elko for whatever reason, and otherwise it was hard because he was still the only one who had the knowledge and the authority over the code base. And with Elko leaving Tweag, that was kind of an extra motivation to try and break out of this situation. I had managed to get commit access to Nix some times ago. Yeah, mostly because I could just go talk to Elko, and we had a chat between Elko, Arno, who was more or less our manager, and we sat the three of us together thinking, how can we smoothen the development of Nix? And Théophane is a big contributor. Maybe you should just get commit access and help Elko. So that was a nice thing, but that only happened because we were working together. And so seeing that Elko going somewhere else made me want to push that forward and try and have a way to maybe give other people commit accesses. I mean, that's just a mean, but increase the bandwidth of Nix contributions, regardless of whether you can just grab the actual maintainer. So which is what led to the formation of the Nix maintenance team as a way to replicate this proximity that some people could have, but in a broader context.
Let's pick up this topic of conflict of interest. So I know that in the community, there was some perception that so many Tweagers being working on Nix means that Tweag has an outsized influence on the ecosystem. How did you perceive this from the inside?
So it's really tough to say. I think there's two parts to that, or at least two, let's say, periods. The first period where Tweag happened to hire a large number of big Nix contributors, just because, we had Nix-related consulting jobs, and so we wanted people to be there. But most of these people were actually working for clients, not necessarily talking to each other more than needed. But after some time, we started to realize that, we have 10 different persons working independently on Nix-related things. Maybe it could be good for them to talk to each other every once in a while. It's funny, it's the same kind of problems you have in every community. That also happens within companies. And that's the moment where we started formalizing a bit our work on Nix with the formation of what's now the Nix technical group within Tweag, which at the time was led by Graham Christensen. So that had several effects. One is that it was, I think, a pretty big boost on productivity, just speaking about the output. That was glad because we had different expertise, even within the Nix ecosystem. I mean, that's huge, and people could help each other much more. That was and that still is great. But one other thing is that it brought this visibility both internally and externally. That actually we own, for some definition of owning, but most of the biggest Nix contributors are working for Tweag, and that creates a very, very weird balance. And so Tweag was aware of that and trying to smooth that, because that, I mean, both for pure human reasons and also because we had no interest of getting hold of the ecosystem with consultancy. We don't care. We don't want to maintain anything. And also from actual triggers, which led some of them to leave the company because they didn't want to be in a monopoly. And so there has been this peak. And after that, things started to smoothen again because, a number of people left, including Elko, which changed a bit the face of the topology of the community. And that's also when a number of other big players starting riding in the ecosystem, be it other consultancies like Nemtide or product-based companies like Flux or Cashix.
Yeah, thank you. Let's continue with Matthias. What this is exactly what I wanted to ask. What kind of companies are investing in the Nix ecosystem? Why are they adopting Nix as organizations or even institutions if they're public institutions?
Yeah, I will get to that, but I just wanted to say that I think Théophane said a very important word about conflict and of interest, and also the health of the ecosystem and diversity, at least in my opinion, which was the word balance. And at Tweag, there were times where we thought ourselves, there was no evil intention or whatever, but is this getting out of balance? Are we monopolizing too much the Nix ecosystem? And also my experience with the Nix ecosystem was very, very diverse. I've seen it from the more individual contributor perspective. And as a user, I have seen it from the public institutions perspective through Summer of Nix and also my former work in academia. And now I see it also from the perspective of diverse businesses who want to construct their product on top of that, or even use it as basically the main tool to handle their infrastructure. And so all of these people have an interest in Nix, and I think that's what makes it sometimes difficult to explain. Also because there's diverse interests and diverse uses of Nix, and to me that's at the same time also the strength of that ecosystem. For example, companies can benefit from the thousands of contributions that individual contributors bring into Nix packages. Sometimes you get edge tools, which very few people use, and actually with Nix you can use them in a very robust way without, having having a huge company always behind them. And it just opens up all kinds of different use cases. Also, if you think about, hardware, where you have all kinds of exotic compilation problems and whatever, there's no company which can actually cater to all of these needs, but lots of companies, have a need for that support. And so to me, to come back to your question, it's very, very diverse, the users of Nix, and I think it's exactly that diversity which is a strong side, and I'm trying to lobby on different levels for preserving that diversity and trying to actively see this.
But why do organizations even invest into open source? Because for many, especially very commercially oriented companies, there's no obvious return on investment. Essentially, you're giving away effort that you're spending. What's the interest of organizations, companies, and institutions alike to support open source, and Nix in particular?
Yeah, I think we really have something which deserves the name of commons, which is a very often used word in the open source world. And so Nix packages is a common common good, if you want. It's a common resource that lots of people can use, and it just came about in some sense, without anyone from the open source world specifically putting a lot of money into it with the intention to create that. And that's also the beauty of it. And I think having a community that is gathered around such a common resource and working together on it is also something which creates a lot of cohesion in the community. Like another member of the Nix community actually once told me that having a common project or something like this can actually bring people together. And it's Ninja Trappeur, or I think he changed his handle, who has thought a lot about this, I think, and I found that very, very like a very good comment. And so, and companies obviously they want to benefit from the commons. They want to benefit from all the maintenance that people put into Nix packages without having to do that on their own behind the scenes. And in that sense, it's the same as companies benefiting from, I don't know, the streets, in a city, and other common resources that they're using, and that they can build their businesses on top. And of course, there's also a danger of people just exploiting this without contributing enough back to it. And I think we are always, therefore, in that situation that we need to try to keep a balance and see that no party is, getting full control or too much power in the whole system. Then I think everyone can benefit from it.
Well, that's actually an interesting point, and I think Théophane will also have to say something about this afterwards. We also have an audience question piled up. By the way, please continue asking questions. It's a great inspiration for this talk. Please add your comments wherever you're watching this. So you said there's a risk that others would be exploiting the commons. How would that work? I mean, anyone can just use the software and do whatever they want. It's not a detriment to the ecosystem, isn't it?
That's true, but I mean, you can take, for example, the maintenance question. I mean, you can push features and packages for more short-term interest without the maintenance, the long-term maintenance question being resolved. You can make the code more and more complex when you're contributing without caring about the general health of it. And to tie it back into something you said before, Valentin, that this is a show of conflict of interest. I think I'm definitely always in that conflict of interest myself. Take, for example, a client who comes to us with very good intentions, who wants to, have a new feature in Nix. Then my job is to fight for that, to fight for that client in some sense. But my job is it at the same time as well as as a Nix user for myself, to see that we don't destroy Nix with all kinds of strange contributions that may be useful for individual use cases. And there are other people whose job it is, to maintain Nix packages or something like this. I mean, for example, Silvan from Tweag, I think he was on a show here before, who leads the Nix packages architecture team, and you as well, Valentin, in terms of documentation. We all also have other jobs where we need to keep the long-term interest of Nix and more in mind than maybe somebody who has one specific project that they care about.
Yeah, so that ties into a question that Guillaume has on Matrix. To Théophane, how has working on Nix, the C++ code base itself, evolved since you started working on it? Did it change through increased commercial interest, through wider adoption, that as Matthias has outlined?
I don't think it changed in terms of getting more commercial adoption. Actually, probably more the other way around, because when I started, the only people who could afford to contribute meaningfully to Nix were, well, Elko, or companies who were willing to actually put some money on the table to have someone working full time for a non-trivial amount of time to get some feature adopted. which is actually how like the whole CA derivation started, except that it got cut short because the client who was thinking about investing in that, didn't push that further. So, but now I think there's like more of a mix in terms of contributors between companies who want to push features, companies who want to actually, who are already Nix users, are mostly happy about it, but frustrated by weird corner cases, who just try to smoothen these edges, which are like shorter term projects. It's more nearly at the level of the individual contributor who just sends the pull request to fix a typo. And the actual like real individual contributors who are doing that on their free time, which at a glance represent roughly half of the contributions. I'm totally making up that number, but that's at least the feeling I have. And all that to say that now the contributions are much more diverse, probably, hopefully, because of the work of the maintenance team, which made it more previsible how long a change could make to land, or whether it would land at all eventually. Which means that people who don't have $10,000 or more to spend on some change can actually have the motivation to try and implement it, because they know it can land, or they know they can have early feedback that no, it's not going to cut it. You can stop working on it right now.
Matthias, how you said there needs to be a balance to essentially preserve maintainability of the ecosystem. How can this be achieved in this commercial setting, especially if companies who just want a feature to be in there are only ready to pay as much as needed to get the feature and nothing else? How could it be possible to balance these interests and nudge people to also think for the long term, because they may also be long-term users?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think one where we could concretely advance. So often it's not that companies aren't willing to contribute to the long-term maintenance. It's just that they don't know how exactly, and it's also, frankly, not necessarily on them to define that, how this would go. Actually, I have been approached by companies who were asking, how can I, in a meaningful way, contribute to the health of the Python part in Nix packages, or how can I, these types of questions. And we had a discussion with some representatives of industrial Nix users about having something like a tax system, like we go back to that street example, although it's not perfect, of course, because it's not software, but companies who are in a city, they pay local taxes, and that's how the city can provide all kinds of common goods and infrastructure, and nobody's even discussing about the general existence, of course, about the amount and so on. And then I think there was also not a strong backlash against that idea. The only problem is that I think the implementation of such procedures has to be done very carefully and very well, because, of course, for a company, they will have to argue internally, what are we using that money for? Why are we spending this? How does this tie back into our own interest, and so on? And so if you just kind of make an outright, like a blank tax, and say, well, this goes somewhere to the Nix ecosystem, you are actually cutting those who use Nix internally off any chance to argue for the money, because basically, it just sounds to somebody else in that company who has to approve the money to be, outside of their interest. And so I think the key point is to find a process which allows for both, which makes it clear why these contributions actually are interesting even for that one case that companies are dealing with, for example, because then it ensures that things get integrated in a smooth way, that they can also use that in 1 year from now and so on. And I think if we get that part right, that process, we would actually make it much easier for the companies to invest in it. We would give them a lot more clarity on how things are going. The risk would go down of not knowing where things go, and so I think that would be a very valuable addition, because I talked so far about balance in the sense of maybe limiting the power of people and from that perspective, but actually most of the time I see it from another perspective. I see it from the perspective that I would want to encourage all three or more types of contributors to the ecosystem to contribute more and to be able to do that. And I don't want to achieve a balance by limiting people, but exactly the opposite. I would like to achieve a balance by encouraging everyone to be able to contribute to the whole.
So there's an entire spin-off topic that we will certainly also discuss with Elko Dostra and Ron Afroni from the Nixos Foundation on Friday, December 8th, 1930 UTC. So there's a bunch of episodes in between. And to pile on top the number of conflicts or potential conflicts of interest, Théophane, you're also part of the foundation board who is dealing with exactly these kinds of issues. How can we help direct these resource flows into the community? And so there will be an entire discussion on this in this show with the foundation board or members of the foundation board. But Théophane, to get back to you, to your role as a Nix maintainer and as a team lead at Tweag, what could, like, given these resources flow into the ecosystem, what are they used for? What can they be used for? And are they being used for keeping the code and the community sustainable?
So historically, the Nix community had a very hands-off approach to these kind of problems, in that so there has been, like, the foundation has existed for some time now. I don't remember the exact starting date, but it was created with an explicit mandate of like, we need some kind of entity to essentially pay for the builds of the build servers, but we don't want to do anything more. And that's how it has been running for a long time. And quite explicitly, whoever wanted to, like, pay to get some improvements in the ecosystem should just pay people to do that, like, either like have employees doing that or pay consultancies who do that as third parties. And so that has been working fairly well for some time. There has been very few exceptions to that model. One that I can think of is around 2016. Nix had one big problem, at least big problem for some users, which is that part of the Nix code base, so Nix is C++, but a large part of Nix at that time was Perl, which is, without talking about the language itself, it was a huge problem because of bootstrapping. You needed a Perl interpreter to be able to use Nix, and getting Perl once you have Nix installed is easy. But before that, it was much more painful. And enough people recognized that this was a problem, so that eventually someone organized a fundraiser to pay one person to actually remove Perl from the Nix code base altogether. And I think that was the first, and for a long time, the only example of a community-wide effort, a community-wide financial effort to improve things. So nowadays, the model of you just pay individual employees or contractors to work on whatever is annoying you is starting to reach its limits because, well, essentially we are too. In some aspects, it's starting to reach its limits, and we are more and more looking at having either the foundation or something, funnel donations to really help having a more sustainable thing. a very recent example of that, which was a bit forced down our throat, but which nevertheless is happening, is the whole problems with the S3 binary cache. So for those who don't have the context, the most expensive piece of infrastructure that the Nix community has, and the most crucial one, is the binary cache, which is an S3 bucket, which is growing from year to year, and is costing quite a bunch of money, in the order of $10,000s per month. And until recently, that was generously paid by Infor, who's a company who happened to have acquired another company who was one of the very early adopters of Nix and offered to pay for the bucket at the time where it was probably costing tens or thousands of euros or hundreds of dollars per month. But yeah, at some point Infor said, well, that's all very nice, but we haven't been using Nix for years, and that's a significant cost that we're paying for you without no return. So we'd like to stop that. And when that happened, well, suddenly the Nix community had to organize to find an alternative solution, which came mostly as an effort of a small group, because eventually some people got in touch with AWS employees who offered to fund that for at least a year. But the long-term solution to that is that AWS is happy to pay for that for a while, but we should also, at the very least, prove them that we're not just sitting on their money happily and spending it on useless stuff, but we should prove that we can improve on the efficiency of the binary cache, so that it's not just, hey, we have free money for that, so let's not worry about that. And yeah, that's one of the first big community effort that I can see recently involving the foundation and involving money, because people will want to get paid to actually work on that. And hopefully that's going to be the first of at least several, and maybe many in the years to come. We're still searching for the right processes to make that equal to, again, this question of conflict of interest. We don't want people who have access to the foundation board because, hey, I'm working at a company which also happens to have an employee on the board, so I can just tap him on the shoulder and ask him for 10,000 euros. So there's a lot of things that we need to figure out to really make that happen in a systematic way. But that's probably part of the future of the Nix ecosystem.
Yeah, and we will definitely talk more about that particular issue that you mentioned last on the episode about the foundation board. Matthias, obviously these efforts change how people interact in the ecosystem. How does money play into that? How does it change the dynamics in the community?
That's a very deep question. I think definitely money is, I think it's always not for everyone, but I think it's it can at least change incentives quite a lot for lots of people. And I don't see that as a necessarily moral or bad thing, in the way that people who have an interest of driven also by by money as something which is somehow immoral, because sometimes people don't talk about this in public, but I think it's much better to actually accept that people have for various reasons, just a need for money, and that's something which is influencing our decisions. And so I think it's better to tackle that through transparency. And I think you did a lot, Valentin, in that regard, which is really cool. Making budgets public, but also the Nixos Foundation board in general. I thought that was very positive. And then rather try to to guide and to shape where the money goes, and see that that this is not going to be the only incentive. Try that this monetary incentive actually becomes more of a part of the whole system than as something which is behind the scenes. It wasn't a real. I think the real answer on your question is that I think the Nix community is pretty. There's strong incentives besides money, and that is really, really awesome, and that's great. So I don't think that any or maybe only very few people are purely driven by money. And if you look at other ecosystems, upfront that it's very clear that that's the main driver. Sometimes they are also healthy ecosystems in a way, but that's well, okay, it's all goes through money and so on, and in the Nix world it's not the case, and that's really nice, and I hope we can preserve that. But we definitely shouldn't ignore that money is also part of people's life. And yeah.
Yeah, I liked how at on some other occasion you said that not every contributor is made equal because some of them have substantial resources behind their backs. We talked about this at NixCon. There was a governance workshop about how to organize this. And there are actually notes published on these discussions on Discourse. If you're interested, you can look them up. Théophane, so to continue with that, is there a risk of these commercially backed contributions to the Nix code base or the Nix package ecosystem in general? Is there a risk of those displacing volunteer efforts in terms of just taking much more attention by maintainers? And if so, how to mitigate that?
So I think there's several answers to that. One is that, yes, I mean, obviously these big companies who want to make big investments can have a huge cost in terms of maintenance. Because I don't know, if me as a Nix maintainer suddenly see someone from any company submitting a 10,000 line pull requests, solving a very specific problem that they have, but that either is not relevant or is not at least not the most relevant thing right now. Yeah, I mean it's extra work for maintainers, regardless of what the companies are willing to invest, because generally you can't create maintenance time.
The one limited resource, but is that something that actually happens, that people just drop 10,000 lines of code on you?
So no. No, that was a bit of an extreme example. But in practice, smaller examples of that happen, or not people dropping these lines of code, but people are always, in my experience, willing to cooperate and answering to feedback on their code. And actually, most of the people I've interacted with around the Nix code base, at least, have been really willing to do the right thing. But nonetheless, I mean, that takes time and effort. But another thing I see on that front, actually two other things, is that so one first thing regarding money is that. So there's a pretty funny quote from, I think that's Bergson, who was a very, very famous philosopher of the end of the 19th, beginning 20th century, who was really a personality at the time, a very smart guy, and everyone really honored his whatever he would say. And at one point or maybe several, he expressed how thrilled he was by the technological progresses, because with all these progresses, people wouldn't have to work that much, and now they would have time to think, and the 20th and following centuries would be the golden age of philosophy, which is funny in hindsight, because I mean, it's not what happened in practice, and it's not what happened probably amongst other things because not needing money or not needing to work that much for some people is good, is great, and that leaves time to do whatever you want. But money is actually also a very good driver. If you actually need money and like you need this thing to be done so that you can get paid and so that you can eat and feed your family or whatnot, then you actually want to push things through. And that's something that sometimes individual maintainers can't afford to have. Either it's just a lack of motivation, or it's because they are doing that and on their free time, and so they can't afford to spend the extra 5 hours on that pull request to really make it manageable, which industrial users are more likely to be able to do.
If I can say something about this, Théophane, because I think that's a great thought, and I think it goes back into this whole question of diversity again. I think it is awesome to have people who are exploring lots and lots of things with Nix. We're trying out completely new use cases. We're building up things just because they have the creativity and the time to do it. So that's part of the strength of the ecosystem. And at the same time, exactly what you say, at the same time, if there are certain things which are driven by, maybe there's money behind and so on, there are strict interests and so on, they give us something else to the ecosystem. Sometimes that's also the right driver for stuff to get things done. And again, I would my wish would be to preserve both of that, to that there's space for both approaches.
Yeah, maybe a last point before we talk more about public institutions, because we haven't shed some light on that aspect of the contributor or financial support base. What can people who have the resources, such as employees of companies, people who are backed by some kind of significant resource, what can they do to support this volunteer part of the community? Théophane, do you see that in day-to-day Nix maintenance?
I can see that, yeah. There's one thing I said earlier, which is that you can't buy maintenance time, which is...
Well, you can buy it, you just can't make new, right?
But actually, you can make new if you really are willing to spend the time and effort to get that. I mean, all the Nix maintainers who are maintainers right now, well, they are maintainers because they spent time increasingly becoming contributors and contributing more and more and starting to take a bigger place in that. And a part of the maintenance job, actually, a large part of maintenance is a pretty dull job of triaging pull requests and reviewing them, so dull might be a bit too strong a word, but at least it's not as exciting as implementing new fancy features. And beyond just maintenance, there's always a bunch of grunt work of organizing meetings and making sure that people talk to each other when they should or collaborate with each other. All that kind of administrative work, which volunteers... volunteers do it because they care about the quality of whatever's happening, but they don't do it as willingly as the fun stuff. And I think that's one aspect where actually people who want to invest money can invest in a useful way, because that's generally the part that's a bit left aside in our communities.
I suppose the volunteers not just do it less, they just simply for time reasons do it less consistently. Because, well, it's not their job, right? And they usually have an entire life apart from volunteering for Nix. Yeah. And I have a final question about that for you. But before we get in that, Matthias, what about those public institutions? What role do they play in the ecosystem, and how can they help alleviate all these issues, all these tensions that we've been talking about?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Valentin, because I think really they didn't get enough screen time so far, the public institutions or organizations who are interested in Nix. So the first thing I want to say is that Nix came out of academic research There are very few other technologies where a PhD thesis, is still being read as parts of the documentation, basically, and it's really
Nix
a
is one of them,
success.
in a sense.
Yeah, so it's really a success story for public investments at the origin, even though we are forgetting that sometimes, and we all know as Nix users how powerful it is to to have such a strong grounding in Nix, and I mean the principles behind it. That's not something that somebody comes up who thinks about. Okay, let's design a new product. That we bring to market in a year. That's what comes out of having time. Being a PhD student, being in an inspiring environment in universities and so on. So really, we should not forget that. Then the second point is that public institutions have a huge need for something like Nix, especially in the European Union at the moment. And why is that the case? It's because they have bought in, at least there's a big chunk of it who have bought into the open source idea as a way to make also other public investments more efficient. Take my experience from academia, and probably other people know that as well. There are thousands and thousands of researchers who are producing code at the moment. They're paid by every one of us through tax money, and afterwards, that code is just kind of rotting somewhere. And some of it is great, in the sense that you can have made a nice discovery, and then afterwards nobody can ever do it again because your script is just lost. And the same thing, you cannot collaborate with your colleagues who are also paid by public money. You cannot just reuse their code. There was just no technical solution. And if you go, if you zoom further out to the whole open source world, and I think NGI and Summer of Nix is an example of that. Yes, it's great to have open software and so on, but if you can't build it and if you can't run it actually, then you only have thought about half of it, and for a long time, I think the problem was that the open source world is so, the problem I say, but it's also great, that the open source world is so diverse. But that's a technical challenge afterwards then, to install all of that stuff in a robust way. And there was no real technical solution, to manage all of that diversity. And Nix, there is a technical solution now for this. So you
Right.
can
So there's an
actually,
entire talk by Konrad Hinsen on Nix, or Geeks and Reproducible Science. So what's the role of public institutions here? So there's a direct incentive to support things like Nix and open source in general, but what can they do actively? Which role can they play apart from what we're doing with Summer of Nix, just providing that reproducibility for publicly funded software?
Yeah, so I would hope that that people would directly participate in these digital commons more and more. That means researchers and different library maintainers and so on. I'm explicitly not saying it has to be Nix or whatever, but that whatever solution exists like this, that they get credit for it, that we make it easy for them to do that, because honestly, it's not easy at the moment to make a paper reproducible. I think the Gigs people, they have written 400 lines of Gigs code or something like this, and so yeah, but let's keep these people in the ecosystem. They have long-term incentives. It's a lot, and a lot of people who are doing very cool things. It's just a win for everyone if they participate, and to have them participate, we need to be friendly to them and have their voice heard. And Valentin, one success is that now, for example, you work you work for, you're being paid for the Nixos Foundation, also to be a voice for those public interests, and that is great. So that was my going over time.
Oh, good. We're on the
public
internet, not on TV. We can do 1 minute longer. I would like to direct the last questions to Théophane. If you were not paid to do work on Nix, would you still do it as a volunteer?
Wow, I definitely wouldn't do as much, if only because of time constraints. I would definitely still do it. So I mean, there's one thing about what they're saying about like the best way to ruin your hobby is to turn it into a day job.
I think we all manage that very well.
Exactly. And probably like if it was just my hobby and not my day job, I would feel much less responsibility about whatever I'm doing. So I would probably spend more time crafting funky features and not finishing them than doing this boring but useful maintenance and community help job.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here, for taking time. I mean, well, you have a company to run together with all the other Tweagers. It's not just like that. So the next show will be on Sunday this week, December 3rd at 19:30 UTC. There was audience questions. Why do we stream so early for US viewers? Well, I try to accommodate my guests such that it is so that they can actually join the show. For Théophane and Matthias, who are in Europe, they would have to show up at very late in the evening. I can do this because I'm running the show. It's not that easy for everyone else. So the next show will be for US viewers at 19:30 UTC on Sunday, and we will meet Tom Barrick and John Erickson, who are also on the Nix maintainers team, and they will talk about unexplored superpowers, Nix behind the scenes. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for joining today, and see you next time at the 2023 Nix Developer Dialogues. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, and see you, everyone.
Sorry, cut them off.